Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our second episode. We just kicked off a Pistes Orientale podcast on the previous and the first episode with Dr. Joanna Toy Rambori. Interesting topic that you can check out on our website and channel. And today we're bringing another important episode. My name is Marv, and you're listening to Pistes Orientalia podcast. First, I say greetings to my co-host, Matias. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Now I'm experiencing the white nights. So basically, it's like 3 hours of night. Um, it's very hard to sleep. So, anyway, it's very nice though.
There you go. Okay, among us, it is found Dr. Aleksander Krogevoll. Dr. Krogevoll, thank you for accepting our invitation and thank you for coming to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me on. That's a great pleasure. I'm good. Just enjoying the nice weather too. I'm from Norway, so I'm used to
Yes.
the short nights and
What
Yeah.
what part from Norway? I should ask.
I'm from
Oslo? No.
I'm from the southwest, so
Oh,
Stavanger, the closest city.
okay. Great, great. I need to go to Norway.
Yeah.
When? I don't know. I'm just hoping when before Christ's return, I can make it. Okay, people. As we were talking with Dr. Krogevoll off camera, and just giving a bit of a backstory how we got to connect. And I was we were telling to him about the title of his book, El Shaddai. This title. Really, can we say it's controversial, thorny, because there's a lot of debate about the real etymology about this concept, this title. But the subtitle tracing the origins of the God of Israel. And I don't know about you, Matthias, but we're all about knowing where Yahweh came from anyway. And this is something that Dr. Krogevoll tackles, among other things, in his book. So today we're gonna remember, people, don't get excited. At least we're gonna try to cover, the questions that we just shared with him. We're gonna try to go over, the bullet points here. And as I always say, and perhaps you're a little bit like, oh, here we go again. But no episode can do justice to a book, because there's a lot of research, a lot of reading. I mean, he can attest to that. You, Matthias, with your work, you also can attest to this. So no episode podcast can do justice to a book, but we're trying to cover the basics, the main things here with the book. So, Dr. Krogevoll, just give us a bit of a background, who you are, your credentials, for people who is not aware about your work, who you are, they can start gaining some context about you.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned, I'm from Norway, but I've spent most of my adulthood in Canada. Been here predominantly here since 2013, where I did my master's and PhD at University of St. Michael's at the University of Toronto. I wrote this dissertation on the topic of El Shaddai, and I got it published last year with the Fund Propuestas. I've been teaching at a university in Norway for the last 3 years, the University of Volda, yeah, and there I'm teaching in all a variety of topics, from pedagogy to introduction to religious studies to ethics and so forth. I'm in Canada now, and I've 2 kids, and they keep me occupied most of the time.
Yeah, thank you for that. So let's go into the questions. Let's dive right in. I'm gonna give you the first question, Matthias, but we want to be very respectful. We try to value every guest's time here. you know But people on the chat with the comments, if you got any question related to the topic, please let's keep it related to the topic because people get excited. We can take it, but at the end of the conversation, right after we have covered all the previous questions. Okay, just so you know, you're not gonna tell me you didn't tell us more. I'm telling you, trust me. So let's go with the first question, Matthias. Dr. Krogevoll, let me know if you can see it on the screen right there. Matthias, the floor is yours.
Yeah. The topic, not question, topic, the intro, defining the problems and the terms, the history of interpretation, and the mountain god, as we have.
Yes.
That's how I begin the book. And maybe an introduction, I can introduce you to how I was introduced to this topic.
Yes, please, by all means.
So I started, in some ways, the research started in 9th grade when I was in a religion study class in Norway. And the teacher was asking the class, if God is almighty, can God create a rock that's so big that he cannot lift it? And if God cannot lift it, then God is not almighty. If God cannot create it, then God is not almighty. And I remember we were discussing this in class, and I approached the teacher after the class, and I asked him, so what's the answer? Is God almighty or not? And I remember he said that the Bible actually never claims that God is almighty, and that the term that we often translate as God Almighty is a mistranslation of the Hebrew. And I was relieved that the size of the rock didn't determine if God was Almighty or not. But that was kind of my introduction into the etymology of El Shaddai, and then of course I forgot it. And then years later, as I was doing my graduate studies, this came back to me. And then, because for most people, El Shaddai, in most English Bible translations, and a lot of other modern languages, El Shaddai is often translated as God Almighty. But this is actually a translation of translations. So that means it's based on the Greek and Latin translations, so Pantokrator and omnipotent. But there's no evidence to suggest that Shaddai actually comes or means omnipotent or almighty. For example, there are other divine titles like Sevaot is also translated into Greek as Pantokrator. I was exploring what the original meaning of El Shaddai is, and if that could tell us something about how God was understood in ancient Israelite religion. And I'm sure I'll get into some of the proposed etymologies later, but I can just give a short overview by saying that the modern discussion of the etymology goes back to the late 1800s when but people have been exploring the etymology way before then. For example, Martin Luther in his commentaries on Genesis is exploring the etymology, saying that Shaddai comes from Shaddayim, meaning breast. But in the late 1800s, a scholar by name Friedrich Delitzsch, he proposed that Shaddai was connected to Akkadian Shaddu, and he believed that Shaddu was a verb, and that it meant to be elevated, to be high, and so therefore Shaddai, El Shaddai meant God Most High, or something like that. But the understanding of Shaddu as a verb didn't really stick, but the reading Shaddu as a noun, meaning mountain, that stuck, and for the last 150 years or so, that has been the leading etymology for understanding Shaddai. On the other element there, with the mountain god, so the mountains, they are significant all over the world, and in ancient Near East is no exception. And in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, we find mountains at key moments throughout. For instance, like Eden was understood to be a mountain. In Ezekiel 28, it's described as like the mountain of God, but also presumably in Genesis 2, it's understood to be a mountain as the rivers flow down from Eden. Abraham is asked to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah. And of course, we have these very famous mountains, Sinai Mountain and Zion in Jerusalem. And these are elevated mountains. So like Mount Zion is sometimes described as like the most elevated mountain, even though if you have been there, it's not even.
It is not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not even the tallest mountain.
It's not even the tallest. Yeah.
Yeah, within the
No.
regions, you look at taller mountains from there.
Yeah, and Zion is in the north, but it's not in the north. So in the south.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So they're borrowing from descriptions of other mountains and making it fit to Mount Zion. So they're probably borrowing from Mount Safon, which is in the north, and that's also how you say north in Hebrew is Safon, because that very important mountain was north of Canaan. Yeah. But there are other mountains too, like the Elijah with Mount Carmel and stuff like that, and even in the New Testament with the transfiguration of Jesus on the mountain, and Revelations where the mountain Zion is coming down as like a mountain.
And Hermon, very important.
Hermon, yeah, that's right. So the mountains come at very like key moments throughout the Bible, and mountains seem to be like the bridge between heaven and earth. They were reaching up towards heavens, and so it's kind of understood that was where heaven and earth met, and so a lot of gods were believed to live on mountains. They were uninhabitable for humans, but so only gods could live up there, and that meant that they were kind of within reach also of humans, that they were not necessarily up in heaven, but they were down here on earth. And mountains have always also been a part of like a safe place for people. That's why we say run for the hills, or which is an expression we also find in the Bible, because if we get elevated, we're safer. Mountains gave shelter, they gave shade to people, so they were like a sense of protection in that sense. Mountains are immovable, so they're stable, they're present. So it says something about the God, because they're always like, you can't move this God because this God is on this mountain. And mountains were also associated with fertility, because rivers and waterfalls come down from mountains, so they were seen as like life-giving. And so when we're talking about a mountain god, it's both, we can talk about the god living on the mountain, but we can also understand these different aspects of the mountain also being portrayed on the god, so that the god means is a source of protection, is a source of fertility, is a source of power and strength and stuff like that. So yeah, a mountain god is a god who dwells on the mountain, but it's also a reliable source of security and for power and a permanent static present.
Thank you for that, Dr. Krogevoll. I've always asked, I don't know about you, Matthias, but now was Sunday school, they were repeating a couple of verses when he mentioned that God is my rock, and as a little child, my imagination is just like, what are they trying to say? I mean, what's that supposed to be? Like, it's my rock, But now reading your, skimming through your book, it's a lot of interesting associations with the mountain, and you just described them a bit more. And mountains are a big deal in the ancient Near East. That's what I can take away from your comments, Dr. Krogevoll. Now, regarding, the etymology, you have a quote here, and this is from your book. You said this etymology, which is the one that you are arguing for, is supported by religio historical evidence. And help me with this, Ugaritic, because I don't handle Ugaritic at all. So, which presents L as consonants and letters right there, which means El, the one of the mountain, and then you gave us the Ugaritic reference plus a Bible verse. So, Dr. Krogevoll, before moving to the second question, this is basically the thing you're going to be arguing, right? That this is the etymology proposed there, that you are what's the word? Just you are advocating, if we can put it that way. And personally, I don't know about you, Matthias, but when you read the Bible, and as Dr. Krogevoll was saying, you constantly keep running into mountains, But Dr. Krogevoll, besides the religio historical evidence, what else do we have in support of this etymology?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can maybe get more into it as we progress too. There are, I find the strongest evidence, the religio historical that you pulled up here, is that Shadday is used as an epithet, as a title for a lot of gods. So for a lot of the other etymologies that are proposed, very few of them are actually attested as epithets. But Shadday is, and so therefore it makes sense that it would be attached to Yahweh and to El. It is perhaps attached to Elu or El Ugarit, but that is not 100% sure. But we know that it's Enlil, for instance, in Mesopotamia, Dagan, and several other gods use this as their epithet. So the one of the mountain, something like that. And El is in a lot of text in the Old Testament, but also in Ugarit and some other inscriptions. The Amorite El, for instance, are associated with mountains on many occasions. So it both fits the religio historical aspect, but it also fits the philological aspect of the epithet.
Thank you so much. Any comments, Matthias, before moving to the second question or topic?
That's. I think we are going to run into this comment in this topic later, but I for my thesis, because it has to do with astronomical objects in the Bible and Second Temple literature, I read a book by Daniel Sarlo, The Solar Nature of Yahweh, which he proposed actually the opposite hypothesis, that Yahweh's original nature was solar. But it makes sense in certain passages in which connect the sun with the mountain, because you see like the sun rising over the mountain in certain passages, like for example in Habakkuk, when God comes out of Zion, and then it says like plague and pestilence follow him, and that scene of God descending from the mountain, and it's like the whole desert is like in flames, because it's like the light of the sun coming out of the mountain and illuminated the whole desert. So it's it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you could see also mountain and sun image and solar imagery also in many passages.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel Sarlo, he did his PhD a few years before me at University of Toronto. So there are definitely solar imagery attached to Yahweh. You mentioned Habakkuk 3, I think it is. But there are also other places that have the solar imagery of Yahweh. We don't know what was original that was originally attached, or was that also borrowed from another deity? I do address like the original characteristics of Yahweh in the book, and so I do mention some elements of the solar imagery, but there's no denying that that they're using solar imagery to describe Yahweh.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say that, I tried to make contact with Daniel Sarlo, but I've been told that I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I've been told he is no longer working or interested in publishing in his area of expertise. I hope not. That's not the case. That he's still around, because he is he is what they call an outside of the box thinker, and he has a pretty good papers in his academia page. So Dr. Krogevoll, before moving into the second question or topic here, we can definitely say that this mountain motif is of course connected to the cosmic mountain, right?
Yeah. So the cosmic mountain is like the idea of like, we can both talk about mountains and the mountain almost. And
Okay.
And so the cosmic mountain is like an idea that we find in different cultures, that is like the world spins around. It's the axis mundi. It's what the world spins around. But it's also the idea of the mountain as the source of fertility, or as the place where the divine lives, or stuff like that. So the cosmic mountain is playing a role here, as it does in several other cultures. There's a great book by Richard Clifford in the 70s, I believe, that is on the cosmic mountain in ancient Near East and in the Hebrew Bible. That's worth exploring.
All right. Okay, let's move on. Thank you for that. So Matthias, help us with the question, please.
So, second question: what's the relation between El and Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible? About the two models and the El epithets.
This is one of my favorite questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I should mention that when I'm talking about Yahweh, the holy name for God, there are a lot of people that don't use this divine name. In the Jewish community, often it's referred to like as Adonai, Lord, or Hashemah, the name. And so I'm using this name but because we're looking at the origin of God. And so, but I would just want to say that I'm doing it out of understanding that not everyone want to use that name, and I think we should use it in like a respectful manner. But I do use it in my scholarship because I'm talking about the origin of the name. So when I read the Hebrew Bible in the text, then I say Adonai or stuff like that. But for the scholarship, then I do use the name that is given in the Hebrew Bible. So for
thank you.
The relationship between El and Yahweh, as there's a quote here, most scholars of ancient Israelite religion believe that El was the original God of Israel. The strongest evidence for that is the name itself, Israel, and so El being a theophoric element there. So El strives or something like that. So if the original God had been Yahweh, then presumably the name would also have been Israel Yhwh or Israel Yah or something like that. And El also seems to appear as the god El in some of the patriarchal narratives. With Jacob, for instance, like I am El, the God of your ancestors, or stuff like that, or I am El, the God of Israel, and here it seems like it is El that is behind the text and not just the word God. So El takes on an appellative, meaning that it becomes just a noun for God in Hebrew and other Semitic languages too. And so when we talk about El, we both talk about El as the God, the high God El, who was the head of the pantheon. But we also talk of El as a noun, like just meaning God. So most scholars believe that El was the original God for the Israelites. I can get into some of the reasons for that when I talk about the origins of Yahwism later on. So then there are two models that kind of have scholars have proposed that for the relationship between El and Yahweh, and one is that Yahweh was originally a part of a title for El. We have, for instance, Yahweh is likely the etymology of Yahweh is a verb, and so therefore scholars argue that this was a part of like a title or a sentence associated with El, like El who brings the heavenly host or something like that. And so Yahweh was the verb here, and that Yahweh was split from this title later on and then became a god in his own right. But there's some issues with that. We never have this full title. It's never been found in extra biblical material or biblical material. So you have to assume this to happen in order for the title to break off to begin with. But it is one of the theories. And the other theory is that El and Yahweh were two independent gods, that El was the head of the pantheon, and that Yahweh was a god that appeared somewhere else, and that we have a process of convergence and differentiation, what Mark Smith calls, where Yahweh absorbs a lot of the characteristics of El and also other deities, at the same time as differentiating Yahweh from other deities. So taking on like maybe the wisdom of El, and then but at the same time saying, oh, but he doesn't have these characteristics because those are foreign to us. So both absorbing but also differentiating between Yahweh and the other gods. So that's the model or theory that most scholars support. In terms of El and the epithets, there are a number of epithets associated with El in the Hebrew Bible. Here on the quote, you have a few of them: El Shaddai, El Elyon, El Roy, El Olam, and El Bethel. There's also El Berith, like God. And so El Berith, that is, we know from extra biblical material, like El had this title also. So these titles were originally attached to El to say something about El, the high god El, like El the Most High, or El who sees, or El the Eternal, or El of a place, like El of the house of God. And later on, as I can get into later, Yahweh probably adapts and takes on these El titles as well. But originally, that they said something about the high God, El. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Now, just commenting on the Yahweh being part of a, like a larger name. Is this something that Frank Moore Cross originally proposed, Dr. Krogevoll?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. Frank Moore Cross is probably the one that is that argued strongest for this theory. I don't remember if it was him that proposed it to begin with, but he was definitely one of the strongest advocates, for sure.
Matthias, any comments?
Yeah, that's very interesting. The hypothesis about the idea that Yahweh was originally one of the sons of El, because that was one of the common interpretation of Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. Like, but I actually more convinced for Heiser's and other arguments of other scholars that if El gave Yahweh Israel, why is name Israel and not Israel? So that's well. But yeah, it's very interesting that if you have the allotment of the nations in Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, similar to how in Ugarit, I think there is a text in Ugarit that also talks about El giving nations to other of his sons. But you don't find Yahweh in the list of Ugarit that we know of. So it seems to be a discrepancy in that hypothesis that Yahweh was a son of El in that case. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we don't have Yahweh in Ugarit, but some of these motifs that each nation got its own god, that is present elsewhere too.
Yeah, it's both share the idea of allotment in Ugarit and also in Deuteronomy 32, which it has. There are 3 texts in Deuteronomy which have the same idea: Deuteronomy 32, Deuteronomy 19, and Deuteronomy 4. And in 32 is just the sons of God, while in the other 2 texts in Deuteronomy connects the sons of God to the host of heaven, which is related to the idea of Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, the God over the stars. And it seems that like God allotted to the other nations the stars to be their gods, because it's in the text in Deuteronomy 19, I think, or 4. I always forget. Like said, do not raise your eyes to heaven and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all the hosts of heaven. Do not worship them, because those are the things that the Lord your God allotted to the rest of the nation, but you will worship only the Lord your God, who take you out of Egypt, out of your burning furnace, etc., etc., etc. So the idea is that it seems like, if that's just I'm throwing ideas, but if Yahweh was one of the sons of El, which Israel was allotted to him, Yahweh would have been, in that case, at least being understood as a stellar deity, like a star, because the other sons of God were identified with the star, with the luminaries of heaven. So
no, that's a very interesting point that you're raised. I think from where I'm coming from, Yahweh wasn't a part of the pantheon of El. And so Yahweh comes from the outside. So when we can, in some ways, we can use the language around Yahweh being one of the sons of El, because at the time when Yahweh enters into the pantheon of the Canaanite pantheon or the Israelite pantheon, then he's probably a lesser god than El, but he becomes the main god. So some of the other deities in the pantheon, they were seen as like the sons of El, but Yahweh wasn't originally a part of this pantheon. So therefore, I don't know if he had these characteristics that some of the other deities in the pantheon had.
Yeah, that will be the point. That if he was originally from the pantheon and not a later comer, someone who came later, he would have been somewhat related to the stars, because in the text in Deuteronomy, the sons of God are basically saying they are the stars. Or, I mean, Deuteronomy 4 and 19 basically say to you, don't worship the sun, the moon, and the star, because those are the ones whom God allotted. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on here. I think I have some comments here pertaining to this other question. Let me just put it right here so people can see it and you as well. It's another quote from Dr. Krogevoll's book. He says, the equation between Yahweh and El took place at a very early stage. That's interesting. This explains why this caught my attention. That's why I highlighted, yellow highlighted there. This explains why there are no polemics. Look at that. No polemics against El in the Hebrew Bible. And yes, I mean, if you're a very careful, attentive reader, Matias, I see no contention, no hostility towards El. Okay.
A lot towards Baal.
Oh yeah.
A lot.
That's,
but
yeah. That's the flunky one. Let's do it. let's move it away from the throne. But I like this point from on part of Dr. Krogevoll's, and then he says, and why the biblical texts rarely distinguish between Yahweh and El. Although the equation happened at an early stage, it was a process that evolved over centuries. So that was a long process. It was not like in a blink of an eye. and then he says Yahweh took on characteristics of El and other gods and goddesses, making other deities irrelevant. Here's your point, Matthias. Because Yahweh could provide the benefits they offered. The second element of this process was to differentiate Yahwism from the Canaanite religious heritage. This process rejected many features of the early Yahwistic cult as Canaanite and non-Yahwistic. This basically summarizes what you were saying, Dr. Krogevoll. So that's why I decided to add that comment here.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I didn't mention that there's no polemics against El, and there's so much polemics against Baal, and we see that there seems to be a knowledge, and some texts there seems to be a knowledge of that El as the high god El, but then El kind of fades away as El kind of gets absorbed into Yahweh. And so this probably happens. It happens early enough that there's no polemics against El, but it also seems that there's some knowledge of El as the high god. So it doesn't happen before recorded history either.
The Ugaritic texts, they basically stop during the Bronze Age collapse, because Ugarit got destroyed, so we don't have anything after that. But in the Ugaritic text, El seems to be to be the head of the pantheon and basically the creator. He seems to be not very omnipotent. Like in this Baal cycle, he gets forced to accept Baal as his viray. I don't remember the text exactly, but there is a text in Ugaritic in which El gets drunk and then start vomiting or something. Or he's there is no polemic in the Bible against El, but El is described as associated with Yahweh. So there is never a hint of the El in the Hebrew Bible is not nearly as powerless as the El in the Ugaritic text. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, and in perhaps in the Ugaritic material, we see some of the similarities between what happens to El and Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible, but in Ugarit, there's something happening between El and Baal, and Baal is kind of taking over the place of El at Ugarit, but it never happens fully before the kingdom of Ugarit cease to exist. But some of, maybe it's happening a little bit later among the Israelites, but El's position is being threatened in the late Bronze Age in this part of the world.
Yeah, it's and also, but I think I don't have the exact reference, but I think in Ugarit, El is never called the Most High. Baal is called the Most High. I think. I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure either. There's some of the epithets that are associated with El in Ugarit, but I don't know if the Most High is found there. I don't think so.
Okay, let me just read this another quote from Dr. Krogevoll's book. I mean, there's a lot of good nuggets there in that book. So this model, which is the one we just were talking about, this model has been widely supported and remains the most well-developed hypothesis for understanding the initial relationship between El and Yahweh. The strength of the hypothesis, Dr. Krogevoll says, is its plausible explanation for why Yahweh is not attested in any Northwest Semitic pantheon. He's an outsider, Dr. Krogevoll. He's an outsider, right?
I'll get into the theory of where he originated, but it's interesting because there's so many cultural remains from the Northwest Semitic cultures that we're talking about Ugarit, but we're talking about archaeological excavation. In Canaan, Israel.
And he's nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be
found in any, even as like a theophoric element in a person's name. So that's the odd thing. So therefore, scholars, it's not that scholars want to like make an interesting story that there was a god before. But it's that there's no evidence that Yahweh was worshipped before the Israelites starts worshiping this god.
Thank you. He continues, and why there is no polemic against El in the Hebrew Bible. The model also explains why Yahweh and El are distinguished as separate gods in some biblical texts. And before moving on here, Dr. Krogevoll, this is a quote, biblical passage for people who might say, hey, you're not quoting from the Bible. Yes, we're quoting from the Bible. And this is, I like the way you translate. I mean, translation really matters. Matthias, you are a translator, a freelancer translator. You've done translation. Dr. Krogevoll, he is trained to do translation from these ancient data languages. So translation is a big deal. And I like the way you translate it. Verse 20, chapter 33 from the book of Genesis. It says, he set up an altar there and called it El Elohe Yisrael. But the way that you translate it, if you can talk just a bit about that translation, Dr. Krogevoll, the way you translate, because I think it's important.
The issue here is that if you say that El, the first El, is an appellative, meaning God, then it would be odd to call it something like, and he called it God, the God of Israel. So that doesn't really work. And so therefore, when you have this Elohe Israel, it likely is the high God El, so meaning that he called it El, the God of Israel.
Actually, Michael Stahl, whose work you cited in your book, he also works a lot on this passage. He says it's a very critical one for arguing that El was the original deity of Israel. Okay, let's move on here with the third question or topic. Let me know if you can see it on the screen. Matias, help me out with this one, please.
Question number 3. Shaddai's etymology is a contested one. So, well, that's a topic. It's a biblical evidence, types of challenges in Shadu. Is borrowed into Hebrew. So,
Thank you. That's kind of what a lot of the book is about, is these challenges. And so maybe I could start with talking about the extra biblical attestations of Shaddai.
Yes, please.
There aren't a lot of them. I could say that perhaps there are 3 that are likely attestations. And the first one is an Egyptian figurine from perhaps as early as the 14th century that has a person's name on it. And it's something like Shadday y Yhwh, and that would in Hebrew that would be Shadday y Yhwh. So my kinsman is the mountain, or something like that. We also have at Ugarit. There's I believe that there's one. There's some that believe that there are 3 attestations of Shaddai, and one of them is interesting because perhaps the full form Elu Shaddai is found there. But that text, it is difficult because there are no word dividers and stuff like that in that text. So it's difficult to say what the text looked like originally. But it's likely that it's referring to Shaddai there, I believe. And we also have Shaddai at the where there is references to Shaddayin, so in plural form, and the Elohim. So we have gods and Shaddayin. They are in plural form, and it seems to be addressing a situation at the divine council where the gods are gathered, and that's also interesting in terms of the religio-historical aspect, because there, if the gods can be referred to as the mountain ones, because the divine council was met.
I'm getting excited here.
That's because the divine council also, it's the gods who gather in the mountain, and also the gathering of the stars, like in the passage in Kings and Chronicles about the death of King Ahaz, who is condemned to die because God is surrounded by the heavenly army, and the prophets see that the spirits comes before God. And the scene is kind of like in heaven, but it seems like during the day. So it's like the firmament, and above the firmament are the stars, and God is like talking to them, and they are like discussing how to kill the king. So this is the mountain, all the stars. So how to,
Yeah.
So the extra biblical material are interesting for a few reasons, both that they're quite early, and that perhaps the full form Elu or El Shaddai is found at Ugarit, and also the parallelism between the gods and the Shaddayin at Dayala are interesting. And then getting into the challenges of the name, there are a few. The challenge is that there's a challenge with every element of Shaddai, and the first is like the phoneme shin, the first letter, and then there's the gemination. So often we'll say the doubling of the D in Shaddai, and then there's the ending, so the yod or the I suffix, or perhaps an original part of the noun. So most likely it's a shin. Shin, the first letter, can have been pronounced in different ways. And so therefore, scholars have argued for different etymologies based on what the first letter of the word originally was. Was it a shin? Was it a sin? Or was it a tav? Or similar to tav, ta sound that became shin later on. In Hebrew, there's always distinguished between sin and shin, even though it's written with the same letter. So depending on what you believe there, the original letter of Shadday was probably a th or a sh. The gemination of the dalets, so the doubling of the D, we can say, that most likely is a PL form of a noun, so therefore it becomes the doubling of the D. It isn't necessarily a doubling of the D, it's just that we're supposed to pronounce the D for longer. So therefore, we write it as two Ds. And so therefore, it could be something like the PL form of noun is often used for something that is like a profession or something like that. And then the final A, that is either a part of the root, or it could be as a suffix. And then there are many suffixes, or there's a type of adjectival suffix that were attached to nouns to make the word something like the one of. So for Shadday, if it's come from Shadu, it could be the one of the mountain. Or we have Haggai, a name of a person, Haggai, a prophet. That is probably like the one of the festival or something like that. So presumably born at a time of a festival. Maybe should I get into some of the etymologies, or are you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
So there are proposed a lot of different etymologies for Shadday. Shadday is probably the divine name in the Hebrew Bible that has stirred the most discussion. Some going all the way back to the Hebrew Bible itself, where they're playing with the name, and they're playing with Shadday, and they're using a word Shaddad, meaning destruction. And so their scholars say that Shadday perhaps came from Shaddad, meaning destruction. And the complication with that is that Al was benevolent, and as far as I know, Shaddad didn't feature as an epithet for any deities. So the main issues for that one is that you have to explain some of the religio-historical aspects for the destroyer, seeing Yahweh as the destroyer or El as the destroyer. But at the same time, this etymology is definitely found in the Hebrew Bible, that they're playing with the similarities between Shaddad and Shadday.
The destroyer seems to be like subsidized to the angel of Yahweh, or the destroyer, like it's like put to another member who is like, that's his job basically.
Yeah. So in terms of the destroyer element, yeah. So there's definitely destruction associated with Yahweh too, but this as an epithet is not necessarily found for other deities, so you'll have to explain how it originated as an epithet for L too. There are other etymologies that are like in Greek we have both the Pantokrator, like the ruler of all, or we have ikonos, which is like he who is sufficient. And this probably is an attempt to derive something from the etymology, assuming that it's asher and dai, so who is sufficient in Hebrew, but that is unlikely. We have some other etymologies that borrow, for instance, from Egyptian, should as a savior there. I believe that this works as a title in Egyptian, but it doesn't translate into Hebrew because there they would use different sounds when I was converted into Hebrew. So should wouldn't be a should in Hebrew. It would be sit or something like that. So it doesn't really translate into Shadday. Others have connected it with Shaddu, meaning like a spirit, or like a personal, spiritual, protective God. We do have Shaddu in the Hebrew Bible too. Sometimes that's translated as a demon, but Shaddu in itself doesn't necessarily mean demon. But we do already have Shaddu in Hebrew, so I don't know how it would be that we would have two different forms of this either. And there's some differences between the vowels there.
That term, Dr. Krogevoll, that term, shedim, I think it is, correct me if I'm wrong, shows up on Deuteronomy 32, if I'm not mistaken. 17, I think it is. I don't quite remember. It's been a while.
They worship demons. They are not
Uh-huh.
gods whom
Yeah.
they have not known.
And the Apostle Paul, he quotes from that passage. He quotes from that passage, but in his Hellenistic, context, for him, these are real entities, little g gods.
The gods said sacrifice to demons when you go to the market.
Yeah. Now I wanna add one comment though on the philological, and I mean that's the section when things get tricky, and that's when scholars, just like Dr. Krogevoll, get into the play here, because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of due to the nature of the sources, if I can put it that way. There's a lot of, scholarly, not quibbling, but, trying to put the pieces together, to make sense. But that's why there are proposals, right? Not only one, but more than one proposal. But that's the section that I found the most tricky one, due to the challenges that it poses. Now, you, Dr. Krogevoll, what you're trying to do is that the logical path, deriving from the evidence, is going with a shadow from Akkadian, meaning mountain, right? That's the option you're going with. Do you think there is a lot of opposition, within academics towards this proposal, or there are more scholars inclined to agree with it?
I think that there's some opposition to it, but I think most scholars would lean towards the Shaddu. But there, part of the issue with Shaddu is that there have been proposed different ways that Shaddu has been introduced into Hebrew, for instance. And as I mentioned earlier, the first person to propose Shaddu thought it was a verb and that it meant the elevated one, and so therefore they were criticizing that. And then we have Albright, a very famous scholar who was using a rare form of Shadday as the Shadday y Yhwh, which is a form that we have of Shadday in East Semitic languages, but a rare one. So he was saying that it was this rare form that was borrowed into Hebrew, and Frank Moore-Cross that we mentioned earlier, he had believed that it came from Shadayim, so breasts, and so people have associated with Shadday, but they have had their own spins on the Shadday, and so some of the criticism of the Shadday etymology is also their spins on Shadday, not necessarily that it's the wrong one, but the way that they're proposing it perhaps wasn't correct. So that's some of the pushback against Shadday. But at the same time, even though I believe that this is the right one, I'm not going to die on this hill because it's not like a solid.
Yeah.
This is the only possible. But from what I see, it is the one that makes most sense philologically. It's the one that makes most sense religio-historical. It's used by so many other deities, and so therefore, on those grounds, I believe that this is the best etymology.
Thank you. I just want to add another comment. Matthias, you tell me if you want to add something else. But just going back with the year, for people in the audience, this is that Deir Allah. How do you pronounce it? Deir Allah. That's the way you say it.
Yeah.
Deir Allah. Deir Allah inscription. I have a quote here also from you're quoting from Professor Kyle McCarter Jr. And I like that quote. It's from this Bezor in the 80s. He said, in Northwest Semitic tradition, the assembly of the high gods met on a mountain, a fact that may explain the name Shaddaying. Look at that, Shaddaying. F.M. Cross has amassed of philological evidence that shows the biblical divine Shaddai must mean the one of the mountain. In our text, and you can go there, maybe taken from, maybe taken as a plural of Shaddai, thus Shaddaying the ones of the mountain gods. That is, the gods who meet at the mountain of assembly. Look at that.
Yeah,
And Matthias.
That's the connection with Isaiah 14. In the mount of assembly above the stars of God, I will put my throne.
Dr. Krogevoll,
I will ascend above the stars of God in the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north.
He mentions that. And I don't know about you guys, but my mind when I was reading that section was going like, a lot of things was going through my mind, because I don't know if you remember, and you quote from this guy, Dr. Krogevoll, the late Edward Lipinski, famous Semitist, because he has this article about the mountains of El in Armenia tradition, something like that, and you quote from that paper on your book. But what caught my attention is that he mentions Jesus, going with the apostles to the big mountain, and he argues that mountain is Mount Hermon. And he adds this line like, hey, tradition told that some assembly was, gathering over there, okay? And Jesus, when he says, my ecclesia, my assembly, the gates of Hades will not able to withstand it, it's like Jesus it's like Jesus is poking the other assembly's eyes, because my assembly is about to blow him up. So I like the reference.
Yeah, and that's
it takes a new meaning.
Yeah, the Hermont and that region is a whole huge package of meaning and images. We shouldn't go there because it will take the whole live stream. So, right.
Yeah, I like that quote. I like that article. I try to find it, but it's you need to pay for it. But Dr. Krogevoll, you had access to that, right? So you didn't
Yes.
have to pay.
I'm happy to share with you if you if you want it
Oh,
after. But
thank you,
yeah,
thank you.
so yeah, so that's the thing with the Shadday from Yhwh is both the philological aspects. It explains the different elements of the philological challenges that I've coined it as, and then it has this religio-historical aspect also that. So therefore, it's the only one etymology that I can see that fits. So from there, I could maybe touch on why or how I believe that it entered into Hebrew.
Yeah, please go ahead.
And I believe that. So, for instance, the high god Enlil in Mesopotamia, he was associated with the mountain and was called. The one of the mountain had this Shadday epithet, and Enlil also becomes equated with Dagan, and Dagan is gets this title Shadday, and he sometimes they don't even write the name Dagan; they just write Shadday or yeah.
Sorry, like
Don't let it
random
go.
thought.
Don't let it go.
Yeah. If Dagan was another epithet for El, it means that first Baal, it's also a son of El, because it seems like he is and he isn't, because Baal is the son of Dagan, but if Dagan is El, Baal is the son of El, even though it seems like he isn't, and that could be a possible polemic against El in the Hebrew Bible, because Dagan is usually associated, in the Hebrew Bible at least, with the Philistines. So
yeah, but there are different pantheons at play here. So we have some pantheons in the Eastern Semitic cultures. We have some in the Northern Semitic cultures. We have some in the so even though some of these deities are found in several of the same pantheons, it doesn't necessarily mean that El in one pantheon is the same, exact same as El in another.
Yes.
But we know from, for instance, the pantheons at Emar and Ugarit, they became identified, and so therefore El and Dagan became the same god at Ugarit, and so therefore it's likely that since they become the same god, it's likely that El would also take on the title Shadday, because at Emar they wrote Dagan as just Shadday or Kur, or also meaning mountain, and so therefore Shadday made its way up to Ugarit, and we know that there was a lot of boring in this Canaanite Ugarit.
Yeah.
So I believe that this is a likely scenario for how it was introduced into Hebrew, and we know that El is associated with the mountains, so therefore it was likely title to end up for El as well.
Yeah, so it's true there is no polemic against El in the Hebrew Bible, but some deity that was identified with El in some other contexts, in other pantheons, that deity was the victim of polemic in the Hebrew Bible, especially in the stories of David and the Philistines. But
yeah. For sure. There's definitely polemics against Dagan in the Hebrew Bible.
Thank you. All right, let's move on here. Matthias, you're up.
Okay, question number 4. Regarding Shaddai's meaning and use in the Hebrew Bible, what are some noteworthy findings laid out in your book?
Yeah. So Shadday is used both in the short form and the long form. So the long form El Shaddai and the short form Shaddai. Most of the time it's used in the short form, so just Shaddai. And so it's used 8 times, I believe, in the long form, and then 40 times in the short form. Of these 40 times, it's found 31 times in the book of Job. So it's a very Job heavy title, and here it's used together with other titles for God. It's kind of used interchangeably, and here, from my reading at least, it doesn't seem that they're playing necessarily with the etymology or theology of Shaddai at the same extent that they do in other texts. What is interesting with the long form El Shaddai is that it's associated with both Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses, and it's often found at times of blessings in the Pentateuch, and they are so therefore people have assumed that it perhaps means Shaddayim, meaning from breast, because of fertility, because there's a promise of subsequent offsprings in these blessings. There seems that the priestly source used the long form the most, and therefore scholars have argued that the priestly source invented El Shaddai as a title, because the priestly source doesn't really reveal the name Yahweh until the time of Moses, so therefore uses other divine titles. But I'm arguing against that it's only the priestly to invent it, because there seems to be some text like Genesis 49 that uses the long form. Ezekiel also uses the long form, but Ezekiel is priestly influenced at least, and there's also another text in Genesis that is not associated with the priestly source, Genesis 43, I believe it is. So there seems that other sources are also using the long form, but El Shaddai appears often at times of name changes. So at the time when Abraham changes from Abraham to Abraham, then it's El Shaddai. When Jacob changes his name to Israel, then it's El Shaddai who appears. And when in Exodus 6, with the interaction with Moses, when God changes the name from El Shaddai to Yahweh, it's kind of so there's a lot of name change happen too. And some of the other use, they're in the Hebrew Bible, they're drawing on the etymologies, or folk etymologies. So they're not necessarily the actual etymology, but they're playing with the sounds of Shaddai. And so we have this Shaddad, meaning destruction, that we find in Joel and Isaiah, perhaps in Ruth too. So they are playing with the different sounds and of Shaddai, and using Shaddai both as a title for God, but also as a wordplay. And then there are elements that perhaps could indicate that they also understood Shaddai as meaning the one of the mountain in some text, but we can't say that that's throughout the Hebrew Bible, because it isn't.
Yeah, let's be careful on that. We need to be cautious. Matthias, do you want to change your name? I personally, I don't like my original name, so I very much would like to trade. Oh my goodness, because we've been talking so far about changing names, the way it works. I had a one, not a question maybe, or a comment about I forgot about the Dagan and Enlil. I mean, there's no so much evidence, Dr. Krogevoll, about this guy Dagan. I think there is much fuzziness around this figure, and perhaps the data that we have is not conclusive, and that's why scholars, they're very cautious. Sometimes there are some who go a little bit further. But me, I just as a comment here, as I'm reading you in your book, you're very cautious. You go as far as the data is available, which is something that I find very trustworthy. I don't know if you have the other. Let me see if I can put it right here on the screen. Oh yeah, but yes, topic number 5.
Topic number 5. So chapter 5 is
like-
about Yahweh's southern origins. Give us some takeaways from it.
I like this one.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the book is about both the El Shaddai element, so El and his title Shadday, but also on Yahweh. And so as we mentioned earlier, there's no evidence in any pantheons, in any as part of any personal names that Yahweh seems to have been worshipped in the West Semitic, Northwest Semitic region before the Israelites start worshipping Yahweh. So the first 2 mentions that we have of Yahweh is at the Moabite stone, Moabite stele, and the Tel Dan stele. And here we have both at the Moabite stone, there's a reference to the vessels or something of Yahweh. And at the Tel Dan stele, there it's Yahweh is a part of a theophoric part of a name. So there's a name that has Yahweh, Ahasiah or something like that. So therefore we have Yahweh there. So since Yahweh is absent from these pantheons, scholars started looking elsewhere for the origin of Yahweh, and they started looking at some of the biblical texts. And so the earliest form of this, what became the Midianite Canaanite hypothesis, was that Yahweh was associated with Cain, so the Canaanites. Here, some of that is built on some of the biblical traditions associated with Cain. After he killed his brother Abel, then God puts a mark on Cain, and so that was seen as like a significant mark and as a sign of someone who worships this God. Cain is also associated with the first time the Bible mentions that at this time they were starting to call on the name Yahweh. That is at the end of like the list of the Cain's sons. And there are a lot of Canaanites that are Yahwists in the Hebrew Bible. So therefore they were like, oh, perhaps the Canaanites were worshiping Yahweh before the Israelites. The Midianite side of it, that's built on Moses and his in-laws. After Moses kills a person in Egypt, he flees to Midian, so today's Saudi Arabia. And this is where the burning bush episode is. And here the mountain is already holy, or the site is already holy at least, because Moses is asked to take his shoes off before, because you're standing on holy ground and stuff like that. And Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, he has a few different names in different traditions, but he is described as a priest. He's never described as a priest of Yahweh, but then there are elements in the narrative where he makes a sacrifice at Mount Sinai instead of Aaron and Moses, which is kind of an odd thing. So there are elements of the Midianites that scholars have been pointing to. And then there's some very old poetry, perhaps some of the oldest poetry that we have in the Hebrew Bible. And Judges 5, Deuteronomy 33, Habakkuk 3 and Psalm 68 that all describe Yahweh as the one of Sinai, or as at least Yahweh marching in this southern region. And there seems to be a memory of Yahweh in the south, in an area that wasn't controlled by the Israelites, that Yahweh originating here, or not necessarily originating, but at least marching here. And then the final point is there is an extra biblical discovery that comes from Egypt, from the late Bronze Age, and then there are these the shasu, and the Yahweh is used as a title or a name for one of these shasu, these nomadic groups, and so therefore there's a reference to the shasu of Yahweh, and that's how you would write Yahweh. And so there seems to perhaps be the earliest attestation of Yahweh is perhaps among these shasu people, these nomadic people, and so were they worshippers of Yahweh, perhaps, and these shasu of Yahweh, they are mentioned twice in 2 different lists, and they are connected to Seir, so they seem to be pointing towards the same direction, so south of Canaan, where some of these Hebrew poetry texts, like Psalms 68, Genesis 5, Deuteronomy 33, and Habakkuk 3 point to. So I'm not super convinced by both the Canaanite and the Midianite elements in the hypothesis, but the poetry and the shasu of Yahweh are very interesting. Especially because Yahweh, we don't find him anywhere else. And then and when you say that the poetry and the shasu of Yahweh are interesting, then perhaps we can entertain the Midianite and the Canaanite elements of the theory.
Jethro it's very interesting that Jethro did not know that Yahweh was the God of all gods. He realized that after he visited Moses. It's very interesting.
So Jethro, he has this exclamation where it's like, and Yahweh is the greatest of all gods, which is also interesting because he's titled as a priest. And so either was he a priest of this Yahweh before, or was he a priest of another god before? The text doesn't say, but there seems Jethro takes on kind of a role. So I'm not saying that the biblical text about Jethro is historically accurate, but there seems to be some associations with Jethro and the early worship of Yahweh, so maybe a memory, long gone memory.
One question: what's the explanation of the people who proposed the Canaanite hypothesis? What's the explanation about why the line of Cain is looked, at least in Genesis, it seems that the descendants of Cain are looked first as the ones who came up with all the technology, because they are the ones inventing everything. Yet at the same time, they are not looked upon as good people. Like, Tubal Cain, I'm going to kill everyone who look at me like ugly or something like that. And if they are worshippers of Yahweh, why the priestly author or the final redactor didn't put them in a better light?
Good question. So even though the Cainites they're said to be the sons of Cain, if you're to believe the biblical text, like as infallible, then there's the issue with Noah, and the ark comes after, so all people died, and then how can the Cainites be the sons of Cain then? But more likely that the Cainites is this Miller, who had that theory that the Cainites is they share the same root as Cain, and it means something to form or to fashion, and so that they were metal workers, and so therefore Cain is just the heroes at Bonomus, or like the one that they attributed their tribe to come from, but in reality that they were just people that had this certain profession, and so that they're linked to Cain through the shared Semitic root, more so that he was actually their ancestor.
Yeah, that's for example, if they're, because the weird thing about the line of Cain is that they are inventing everything, like cities, music, tents, everything. Yet they are putting a very bad light. But also you have the Midianites, because Moses was arrived in Midian. Jethro was a good guy. Yet the Midianites sometimes invaded, Canaan and slave Israel for a few years until a new judge came. So the fact that they had a good past doesn't mean that they are going to be always good guys, because sometimes they oppress the Israelites. So it's not,
yeah, exactly. But it's the Midianites that bring Joseph to Egypt, but it's also kind of the Midianites that bring them out of Egypt through Moses and his father-in-law, and the Midianites, they become their arch nemesis for a little while of the Israelites. So it is interesting that there's some positive reflections about the Midianites too. So that is kind of an element in the Midianite part of the Midianite Canaanite hypothesis that's interesting, because they become the nemesis of Israel at some point.
Okay. Matthias, go ahead.
So, question number 6. Why does the evidence point to Yahweh being a mountain god?
Yahweh is associated with mountains throughout, and there are God is said to dwell on Mount Zion, perhaps Mount Sinai too. Dependent, we're not quite sure what the original text there looked like. So the idea that Yahweh dwelt on a mountain seems to be in the Hebrew Bible several times. Yahweh is also described as a mountain god in 1 Kings 20. So there's a battle. I forget who it's against. The Arameans, and here one of the Aramean soldiers says to the king that we shouldn't battle against the Israelites on mountain because their god is a mountain god. And later in the next chapter, in chapter 20, after Elijah has battled against the Baal prophets and the Asherah prophets at the mountain, then he flees and he goes to Mount Sinai. So he goes on a very long wandering to a mountain outside of the territory of Israel. And so why would he go there unless he believed that this to be the original place where Yahweh was to be found?
Or maybe he wanted to reboot the covenant. Start again.
Yeah.
So definitely there are different theologies at play there. Elijah later becomes kind of the one of the archetypes for what a prophet is, with Elijah also being at the transfiguration of Jesus later, but with Moses too, and these are the two people that are associated with this Mount Sinai. Yahweh is said to dwell in Jerusalem on his holy mountain, and we have from the poetry, we have this title, The One of Sinai, and we have similar, like we have Baal is referred to as the one of Saphon. So we have these titles that seem to be associated them with the mountain where they were believed to dwell, and so there are several elements in the biblical text to point to Yahweh, both being associated with mountains and therefore, but also dwelling on a mountain. And from there we have this element, because Yahweh is a mountain God. He's the source of fertility. He's the source of protection. He's the source of power. He's the one that won't be moved and stuff like that.
Yeah, but in the text, in when the Philistines or the Arameans said, "Let's not fight the Israelites in the mountains because Yahweh is a mountain God," Yahweh actually said, "Okay, you know what? We are going to defeat them not in the mountains, in the plains, because they say that." So it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Say, okay. So like,
100%. And in I'm exploring this in an article, because earlier with Elijah, he is kind of beating the Baal prophets, and therefore you're to believe that God is in this. God is a storm god, or Yahweh is a storm god. But then at Mount Sinai, just a few chapters later, there's Elijah does not find Yahweh in the storm. He finds Yahweh in the quiet. So in these texts, they are very theological texts, but they're saying you might hold Yahweh to fit this sphere, but actually this sphere doesn't hold all the characteristics of
if I may add something there, Dr. Krogevoll, Matthias, I think here is where I don't know if you have read Angelica Verlejun's a monograph, a more civic, Yahweh's diversity, I think it is, came out last year. But she's got this quote in her monograph where she says, we got a variety of profiles when it comes to Yahweh. We have a variety of profiles along the Pentateuch, prophets and the writings. It's not one monolithic. you have different profiles about the God of Israel. Now that you brought that up, I'm glad you brought that up, Matthias, on the fields, because this is another point that you touch on in your book, Dr. Krogevoll. One of the I'm not sure if it's one of the etymologies or meanings, El of the fields, something like that, or El of the plains. Just very quick, do you think that's the second most do you think that's the second etymology that can go like toe to toe with this etymology of the mountain, or it has fallen out of disgrace here in recent scholarship?
No, it's definitely the one that's it's one of the most popular etymologies, but it has some issues with the philological elements, because it's Shadday is field, and Shadday, Shadday. So you hear there's some similarities, but it's not the same. It doesn't come from the same root. And El is never associated with field, for instance. So we're not sure why there would be this title, but the field or the area, Shadday and Yhwh is perhaps related semantically, so it is possible that there's a connection there.
Okay, Matthias, that's the last one.
Okay, last one. Topic 7, El Shaddai and Yahweh. So Exodus 6, verse 2 to 3, the mountain motif and El Shaddai in the air. That's very interesting.
Ancient Israelite religion. Sorry about that. Didn't tell you about this. But that's what it means. Ancient Israelite religion. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So the core of of this comes down to Exodus 6:2-3, where it says God speaks to Moses, and it says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai. I had not made my name Yahweh known to them. So what does that mean? Here you have it up. So here we have this name El Shaddai and Yahweh. So this is one of the few direct equations between Yahweh and any other god here. So does that mean that they were originally the same God because it's used, my name Yahweh was not known to them? Or does it mean that this is an equation between two gods from the outside, and that it's an attempt to say that you have all already worshipped the same deity? So I'm Christian, so my worldview has always been like monotheistic, but that wasn't the case for most of history. Most of history hasn't been monotheistic. So
thank you for saying that, because I recently had Professor Nathan McDonald, and Dr. Ken Brown to talk about monotheism. And thank you for saying that, because I know this is a very controversial topic.
Yeah. It's Michael Heiser based his thesis part on the work of Nathan MacDonald, talking about how Elohim was basically used for any being in the spiritual world or any supernatural being, because it was used even for the ghost of Samuel. So say there are many Elohim. It's a standard in the Bible because there are many beings who are not humans, and they're like more than human or different than human. So it's we have those. It's like the difference between supernatural and supernatural, which is a division. It's a division with post-enlightenment, but most of human history, people did not thought in natural and supernatural terms. They actually thought that the whole thing, the same part of the same universe, so to speak. So,
Dr. Krogevoll, I need to ask you: is this your translation? I mean, this one from the book, or you're quoting from another author, or you translated yourself? Because I mean, again, translation matters. And the way I'm reading it, it's clear. It's clear, at least to me. I don't know about you too. Well, Dr. Krogevoll, he already published his book, so it's okay. But I don't know about you, Matthias. So, Dr. Krogevoll, is this your translation, or what happened there? Because I want to know about that.
So from verse 3 there, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here it's the bet there, the El Shaddai. That is, scholars have wondered what that means. It can mean like as, or in the form of, or something like that. And then, but my name, Adonai or Yahweh, didn't reveal or make known to them. So this is a good translation up there. So if you're just holding this text on its own, it's possible to say that they were always the same deity, because by the name Yahweh. So here I think it's important to say, but that we don't use God there, because it is Yahweh. So I think they're trying to make the distinction there between El Shaddai and Yahweh. And also in some Bible translations we have, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. And so there you don't get the history of religion, because then it just seems like another title. But since we know that El and Yahweh were two distinct deities, and we know that Yahweh came from somewhere else, I believe that they are trying to say we've always worshipped Yahweh, even though that they're recognizing that we know Yahweh as El. So this is kind of a part of the equation, or identification between Yahweh and El, and this is just one of a few examples of where they're trying to say that Yahweh and El are the same deity.
Yes, as Mark Smith, you already said it. Convergence and
Differentiation.
Differentiation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, I mean that translation. The reason I'm asking this to you is because Francis Anderson is very famous. Actually, Heiser quoted him because he came up with a very slightly but very important difference in the way that he translated. And as you know, we both know here, he was a premier Hebraist. So we should pay attention to what he was saying. So Heiser said, well, the author is saying it's the same deity, but different names. But I'm not sure if that's the stance you're taking, Dr. Krogevoll, because I don't want to misrepresent your view.
So I'm saying that they were originally two deities, and this is one of the attempts to equate the two deities. But that isn't just reading this text on its own. That's also reading some of the religio-historical elements into it. So it's possible to read this as just that they were two different names. But from the religio-historical aspect, we know that they weren't just two different names, that they were seen at the time as two different deities, and that this is an attempt to equate those. And through that, Yahweh takes on all the other epithets of El too. So we talked about El Berith, El Olam, El Elyon. And these titles used to say something about El, but then now they say something about Yahweh. So instead of saying El is the eternal one, now Yahweh is the eternal one. Instead of saying that El is the Most High, then Yahweh is the Most High. Instead of saying El is the one of the mountain, now we're saying that Yahweh is the one of the mountain. We've always known him as Yahweh of the one of Sinai, but now we can also call him Yahweh, the one of the mountain, the cosmic mountain, or whatever you like.
I like the cosmic mountain. I want to be in the cosmic mountain. No, I just want to drop this last comment because we're coming to an end now. Heiser used to say that, I don't know if you have read his book, which is The Unseen Realm, Dr. Krogevoll. And one of the things that he argued is that there have been multiple divine rebellions: Genesis 3, Genesis 6, Genesis 11, Tower of Babel. And then he connects it with Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9, and then he goes to Psalm 82. So too much to get into. But bottom line, he says that those Elohim, those members of the divine council, they rebel. They are hostile to God and his plan with humanity. So they rebel and they no longer belong to the divine council. So who is going to replace them? He argued at the end, the eschaton, when the restoration of all things, he said that we, humanity in Jesus Christ, we are the renewed divine council, and then he went in and getting to the cosmic mountain motive, throwing in the mix there. So that's why I get excited about the cosmic mountain. Dr. Krogevoll, this has been an incredible conversation. I don't know about you, Matthias, but I'm thankful beyond measure for this opportunity to get to talk to him.
Yeah, it's very, very informative, and actually, it's very nice how you can keep digging into the biblical text. Like it seems like you never get to the bottom.
No. Final remarks, Dr. Krogevoll.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on. I love to discuss ancient Israelite religion and help us understanding the biblical text even better.
Yeah. Before letting you go, anything that you may have in the pipeline that we should know in our audience? You mentioned an article there.
I'm working on different projects.
Okay.
Nothing that will come out immediately, at least, I'm actually working on Lamentations and the acrostics of Lamentations. Trying to translate this and preserving the alphabet form of the poetry there, and I'm looking at some philosophical archaeology. So how we understand this issue that we talked about today, how we can understand when we're saying that they started worshiping Yahweh at a certain time, we're very influenced by a way of thinking in a chronological order. But what comes before is often hard to determine. And we can say that in order for them to start worshiping Yahweh, they first needed to have a concept of God, for instance, like that. So just trying to explore that too.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, that is a whole new question. But when I read the descriptions of supernatural beings in the Bible, they usually are described as gem-like, like they are made of, like amber or topaz or something like that. So it's very or like the stones of fire in the divine council in the description in Ezekiel when it talks about the rebel. So maybe there is another connection that like divine beings are like gem-like creatures. Maybe it's connected to the idea of mountains, because in the mountain you find stones or something.
Yeah. I've never considered this, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because it also gems could be connected to stars. That's more connection with Chinese stuff.
Now you're going with your thesis. Hold on there.
Yeah, I've been working on that for a year and for 2 years, and I've been like reading so much material that now my brain is in automatic, so I cannot stop disconnecting that.
I know you have. Okay, people. So these are all the questions. Again, we want to thank Dr. Krogevoll for coming on the show, and also to let you know that this is a place, a platform we have created for you as scholars, where we can discuss freely about your scholarship, your projects, as long as you want, and you want to come on and do it. So we appreciate the fact that customers, we knock on their doors, and they kindly accept to come on here and just give us the opportunity, to get to know a little bit more closer. So we're thankful for that. To the audience watching this episode, please take advantage. I dropped some links there where you can go, and if you want to get a copy, okay, my birthday is approaching, so you may think there it's a good idea. But I put a link there on the comments, so you click on it, it will take you directly if you want to get Dr. Krogevoll's book. So go get it and enjoy yourself. So also please give us a like, share this kind of content. That helps us a lot. And just check out the future interviews that we have on our lists, so you can take advantage of that. With Matthias and Dr. Aleksander Krogevoll and yours truly, it will be until the next time. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.